Dave, this is your grandfather, better known as Opa Jackson. When I retired in 1985, I felt like a fish out of water. So the next morning, I got up and put my folding chair in the car, and I drove down to the lake and sat under a big oak tree in the shade and looked out across the lake, not seeing anything particular, but just kind of meditating and reminiscing of what has happened over the last 50 years on my way to work. And I thought some of the things that I had learned, I did not read out of a book. I would say that I learned them from the old school. And I would like to place the degrees in front of my name. That would be PC, HS, and HW. That stands for plain, common horse sense and hard work. And believe you me, I earn that degree every step of the way. And I have found sometimes that hard problems are usually solved by simple solutions. I heard of this man that wrote a book, and then the title of it was, I Learned All I Needed to Know When I Was in Kindergarten. And sometime when I look at some of these well-educated, high-degree fools, I just wonder that maybe he's right. Dave, there's no way to start or end what I want to say to you this morning, so I'll just start and say what comes to my mind. I've often wondered why I took the route that I did, because I found out early in life that I believed in myself and that I was motivated. And when a person believes in himself and is motivated, there's nothing that can stop him. When I was a little boy, my mother told me that there was 3 very important things when I got older that I should remember in my life. First was your religion, and second was your domestic life, and third was your occupation or career. And first, she said, you must believe in your God and country. And second, you must be a good father and a good family man and take care of your family. Decide or want to be a grave digger. The point there is to dig the best, squarest grave of anybody in town. Or a man's ambition may be that he wants to be president of the United States. The point I'm trying to make is to be the best you can, because there's a lot of things that can be done between a grave digger and the President of the United States. But whatever a man chooses to do, he should be the best. I think I would like to change the pace here just a little bit. I guess my favorite sport is football. And I always dreamed that I would like to be the quarterback. Because to me, the quarterback is a stem winder of the whole game. Every play that's made, remember this, the ball has to come through the quarterback's hand. He is the man that calls the plays and puts the football in the right man's hand. He may hand it off, and he may rear back and pass it, but the ball has got to go through his hands first before the big plays are made. And my favorite football player, or quarterback, is Terry Bradshaw with the Pittsburgh Steelers. When he would get the ball and rear back and throw that long pass down to the infield, he reminded me of a good old country boy. The way he acted and talked, he was just plain people, but he knew how to get the job done. I always called him my barnyard quarterback, because when he made the big plays, he made it look so simple. I always seem to think of him as a good old country boy that played and practiced in the cornfield back home. But when he came to the city, he was the old country boy that just wanted to show the city folks how it was done. But when he made the big plays, it just made everybody think, well, that was so simple, I could have done that. And he was so relaxed and so confident in himself. That's why he made it look so simple. The point in the parable that I'm trying to make here, the point is that we are the quarterback. We are the stem winder. We got to make the decision. We got to get the ball in the hands of the right man. No team has two quarterbacks on the field at the same time. The point I'm trying to make is that you have to call and make the shots during your lifetime. So be dead right that you're calling the right shot. I know sometime during the game we're going to fumble the ball, but that should teach you to improve on your next play, because if you keep fumbling the ball, the coach is going to pull you out. But Dave, what I liked about Bradshaw, he was a motivator. He motivated his team behind him so that when they got out on the field, there was nothing to stop them. And there's nothing that gets my attention quicker and better than to see a good motivator that has the guts and determination to get a job done. That's what it's all about. Dave, I would like to take you on a fishing trip this morning. And the point I'm trying to make is, did I move once too often? And I don't know of any place better to take you fishing this morning than down to 6 Mile Creek, full favorite fishing spots. And we sit there and fish and fish and fish and don't seem to get a nibble. So what we do, we pick up the anchor and move to another spot. So we get in the new spot, we fish and fish and fish and don't seem to get a bite or catch a fish. There's something wrong. We know that the fish are down there, they're just not biting. So what we do is start changing bait. we switched to a different bait than what we're using, and they didn't bite that bait. So we kept switching our bait because we knew that the fish were down there. We just wasn't fishing with the right bait. So finally we hook on the right plug and start throwing it out into the river. And nearly every time that we would bring it in, a fish would get on that particular bait. We were in the right spot and we were fishing our hearts out. But the point here is that we wasn't using the right bait. So when you find the right bait, you stick with it the rest of the day because you know that catch fish. You don't need to move around anymore because you have found the right bait. And when you're not catching fish and the mosquitoes are biting and the gnats are gnawing on you, you just get to where you get so discouraged you don't know what to do. So then you pick up the boat and move. And that moving around sometime don't get the job done, because I have sit and watched people fishing and they try one spot and the fish don't bite. They pick up and move again, and they keep moving and moving and moving and moving, and they have their bait out of the water much longer time than they have it in the water. But my theory has always been, you ain't gonna catch no fish and your bait out of the water. This reminds me of some friends that I have known in the past, that they can't seem to get their feet on the ground and find the right spot in the company they're working for. So then they start to moving around, and they move from spot to spot, and finally they find out they don't have no anchor. They can't even anchor the boat to fish. The opportunity may have been there, but they just weren't smart enough to use the right bait. They had to keep working with different things in order to make their program work. And they seem to blame it, just like I said, on the mosquitoes and the gnats. It bothered them so that they didn't know why they wasn't catching no fish. And what I'm trying to say, if a person is with the company and what he's doing is not working, the thing to do is change the bait and keep working with it until you find the answer. And one thing I'd like to say, nothing happens unless you make it happen. I'll say that again. Nothing happens until you make it happen. When you decide to make a change and fish in a different spot in the river, you want to crank up the motor and move. You make that motor crank. You steer that boat down to the spot that you want to fish. You make that boat steer. And when you get to a good-looking fishing spot, you make that boat stop because you cut the motor off. Then you tie it up to the bank. You throw the anchor out, and you start fishing that good-looking spot that you just thought, well, this is the place I'm going to catch that 15-pound lugger today. Everything is just right. There's a nice shade, a little breeze, not much. So you start throwing out one bait and don't seem to get a strike there. So what you do is change the bait. Try a different color, a different type, because you know the fish are down there. You're on the right spot, and it's the right time of day, a good shade, a nice breeze, but the fish just aren't biting the plug that you were fishing with. So you change your plug or bait again. Start fishing your heart out. So you're reeling in, and this big bass lugger pow, and hits your bait on top of the water. And you set the hook. And by the time you feel this big whopper, you know he's a 15-pounder, and he is a trophy fish. You want to try to put him in the boat. So you fight and reel and fight and reel him in and keep trying to work him into the boat. And you want more than anything else in the world is to save this big mouth bass. So you get so excited in reeling him in. Your heart starts pounding. It feels just like it's coming out through your shirt collar. Your blood pressure goes up to 300 points. You get so excited and blessed in the face. You start trying to ease that fish in without him knocking himself out off on a limb or a log. And you're playing him every way in the world you can, trying to get and save that fish and get him in. And about that time, I looked up, and Dave, I saw you grab at with your rod. And lo and behold, I believe a 16-pounder has got a hold of your plug. And I see you standing there trying to reel that monster in, and your smile is getting bigger and bigger, and your mouth is getting to fall down. And good gosh, you're so excited there that you don't know what in the world is going on or happening. So I began to think, what I do now? We both hung two big ones. And I could see that you was going through the same excitement that I did. Your heart was just bursting out of your shirt. And your blood pressure, I could tell by the looks of your red face that it had gone up about 400 degrees. And you was fighting that thing for everything you were worth, trying to get him in the boat. Because that was a big one, a monster. You didn't want to lose him. So you kept reeling and reeling and reeling. And about the time you got yours halfway in, I finally put mine in the boat. And my blood pressure went down, and my heartbeat slowed down. But I looked up, and you still had that big heartbeat and that high blood pressure trying to land your 16-pounder. Because I know that you would be proud to take him home and mount him. But the next thing was to do was to get him in the boat. So you got him on up close to the boat, and I took the fish net and tried to help you get him in the boat, and he made one other lunge and lunged back into the water. And good Lord, I just knew he was gone. But luck would have it, you brought him up to the boat again, and I used a fish net and helped you with the fish net, and by George, you landed him, put him in the boat. And after we caught those two fish, we sat down and rested for a minute. And then the next thing we done was open up a great big Pepsi Cola. We sit there and talked about mounting our prize catch and hanging it in the den at home or in the office, so that we can look back and think of that one day that was very special. It would be a reminder that that was a big catch, and you would never forget it. Yes, that is what life is all about. Hey, Dave, you know, I kind of like that. And someday we'll have to do that again. Dave, the next thing that I would like to talk about is a salesman. Boy, does that cover a lot of things and a lot of people and a lot of ground. Years ago, I could remember asking a man what he did for a living. He said he was a salesman. Well, back then, the first thing that I thought of was that he was a full of brush salesman from door to door, or he sold vacuum cleaners from door to door. And back then, I didn't think too much of a salesman. But boy, as the years went on, did I ever learn what a salesman was. And it dawned on me that everyone is a salesman. Everyone has to have a little bit of sales in their heart or mind, because to start with, you have to sell yourself. That's when I started thinking everyone has got to be a salesman. So let's start at the top, a well-known profession. You ask him what he does for a living, and he says, I am an attorney. He may be an attorney, but I'd say he is a good salesman because he has to sell his client on the idea to let him handle his case. And if the client agrees to let him handle the case, then he's got to take that case before the court and argue the case in front of the judge and the jury. In order for him to win that case, he might call himself an attorney, but I'd say he is a doggone good salesman. Let's bring this thing a little closer to home. Back when we were courting our wives, boy, was we doing a selling job there. We would bring her flowers. We would send her a Valentine card. We would try to remember her birthday and get her some kind of gift for birthday. We would try to find out what she wanted to do and where she wanted to go on your date. And back in my days, I even went around and opened the door for her to get in the car. We were putting our best foot forward, trying to do everything to knock ourselves out, to sell them on the idea that I was a fine young man. I always tried to have my best foot forward, and I pulled every trick in the hat out to win my argument. And if we were trying to convince her to be our wife, we were trying to sell her on the idea that ain't another man around that'll come close to what you need. And if that's not selling, I'd like to know what it is. I'm a firm believer that nothing happens until a sale is made. And when the sale is made, all good things happen. It could be that your wife promised to marry you. That's a sale. It could be that you met and made a friend for the first time. That's a sale. It could be this real estate salesman sold a house. And boy, that's when real things break loose and happen. Because with that type sale, you have made real money. You can take the money you made there and make your car payment, or your house payment, or take a long vacation. A good salesman has got to be a motivator, an optimist, and a mover and a shaker, and believe in yourself, and always have a positive attitude. You got to have a little of the above to make a good sailor. It don't matter where you've been, but where you're going. I try to know my position at all times. You cannot go off half-cocked and get the proper job done. And I've said this many times. Plan your work and work your plan. I know you've heard this old saying, you've got to get your ducks in a row. I think my father taught me this before I ever heard the saying. He got me up early one morning and we went down to the duck pond. And there was about a dozen ducks swimming around on the edge of the lake. And he handed me his long barrel duck gun and told me to sit there and wait, not to shoot just one duck, but to wait until I got at least 2, maybe 3 in a row. And that way you had a chance to kill 3 ducks instead of 1 with 1 shot. And I think maybe that's where I learned my first lesson of maybe you can get 2 or 3 for the price of 1. And maybe he taught me to be conservative too. Sometime I wonder what makes big things happen. And it all starts out with a thought. And you think about it in your mind for a minute, it's a thought. And then that thought turns into an idea. And then you get the idea that you need to put it on paper. And then you make a drawing or a draft or a blueprint. Then you go from a blueprint to tools and material. And you start building. And your thoughts turn into reality because you have acted and developed with a thought. And from that, great, big things can happen. Dave, don't laugh at what I'm fixing to say, but I said earlier that a salesman needs to be motivated, and maybe your opa might be the only person in the world that would have this thought. But it has occurred to me in the past. As I say, don't laugh. Let's just let our minds drift back a long time ago. And I'm going to use a little imagination here. So just hold on and listen. In the Bible, as you know, there was a man named Adam. And the way I imagine it, Adam was standing all out in the forest alone. He didn't like that too much. So, in a way, he got to thinking, well, I'll just take a rib from my body and make of it a mate and call her a woman or his wife. So he did that. And then there was 2, Adam and Eve. And for days, they just stood there and looked and gazed at each other. And then they began to do things together. They went down to the lake and went swimming. And then they gathered berries in the forest and ate. And they kind of got to liking each other. Then after some time had passed by, Later on, they had a child. Well, they had started reproducing or producing. And sometime later on, they had another child. And boy, things were beginning to happen. And sometime along the line, another child came along. Then there was another, and another, and another. They became producers. And old Adam had started off from the beginning, just him. That's the way we start off sometime, all alone in life. I think sometime we could take a lesson from Adam. I don't think that Adam had the idea then that from that, him and Eve would populate the world. Just think, he started from scratch. Now, I would call that a motivator and a planner and a producer. When every man starts out in life young, and he knows that there's a place out there somewhere, he just has to find it. So he goes along and he's full of vim and vinegar, and he starts knocking down trees and clearing new ground and clearing the stumps and the roots. And then he has to turn the earth or the ground under, and then he plants the seed in the earth, and then he watches it grow, and then he has to cultivate it, and he has to hope for rain and good weather. Then if his luck is with him, then in the fall, he takes a chance on whether he has a good harvest or a poor harvest. Let's say you may not have enough rain to make a good harvest, and it does take water. That case, you may have to take a big bucket full of water and go out in the field and water your crop to make a good harvest. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that you make things happen. You've heard me say this before. You do what you have to do. I think that we have made enough parallels and points here, and I think this side of the tape is about to run out. So I'm going to stop here and turn over on the other side and rewind. Maybe the other side will be different. Dave, I thought this side was going to be kind of easy, but I don't know. I would kind of like to let you know where I came from and where I intended to go. And as your grandfather, I would just like to sit down and talk to you as my firstborn grandson, which I'm very proud of. Matter of fact, I'm proud of all of my grandsons. In the beginning, I'm going to be talking about myself, and you will hear I and me and but that's the only way I know how to say it from the beginning. Of course, you'll like the ending of this tape. I've got something very special saved to the end of it. I know you've heard people make the remark or say, oh, he was just on a one-horse farm. But believe it or not, we had a 5-horse farm. I was born in 19 20. And from 20 till 30, we went along and had a pretty good life. But then the Depression hit in the 30s. And those were tough times. Back then, there wasn't much industry. And you couldn't go to a mill and go to work. And there weren't any factories in that area at that time. And back then, anyone that owned a piece of land and they could farm on and make their own food, they were somebody. So you see, back then, my daddy owned a piece of the rock. And we always had plenty of food, but no money. Neither did anyone else. But that was the way it was. So we become accustomed to that way of life. On this farm, we had, my daddy had 2 tenant houses for the sharecroppers to live in to work our farm. And what they would do was till the land, and he would furnish them their groceries and things to live off of during the year. And at the end of the season or in the fall, then we gathered up everything and sold it and shared it with the sharecroppers. They got 50% of what they made, and of course, us owning the farm, we got 50% of the other part. And I was the last kid left at home. Everyone had gone when I became about the age of 13, and I was left with all the chores to do, and that took from sunup to sundown. There was 9 of us kids, and I was the last one down the chute, which there was 8 years difference between me and my next youngest sister. And the fact known then, my mother was never supposed to have another baby. She had gone through the change, and I weren't supposed to happen. So some might call me a misfit, but I will never, ever take the word misfit. I meant to fit. So I had to get up early in the mornings and milk the cows and feed the hogs and feed the horses and the mules. And that was before I left to go to school. And some years we could not get someone to work the farm, and that would fall on my shoulder to take on that responsibility. So that's where I came in. As a young man, between my father and I took the bull by the horns. His health was bad and he was not able to work, but he could support me and show me how to do it. So in the spring of the year, I would plow and turn the ground under. Then I'd lay the rows off. Then I'd plant the seed and fertilize. Then when it started to grow, I would cultivate it. And then when it got grown, I would what we call lay it by, run the last furrow, and wait for the corn and the cotton and the beans and the peanuts to mature. Then in the fall, when it got time to gather, I could not handle gathering all this stuff at one time. So I would take the truck and go to the nearest town, which is about 15 miles away. And they always had workers there, and I would pick up a truckload of colored people and bring them back to the farm and gather the crops. And we worked from daylight until dark. And do you know what the going scale was back then? Was 75 cents a day from sunup to sundown. Then I would take the help back home 15 miles, and by the time I got to town, it was so late, I would sleep in the truck and pick the same crew up the next morning at 3 o'clock and bring them back on the farm together in the harvest for the fall. I know you might be thinking, how would a 13 or 14-year-old boy be driving a truck? Back then, it was the fact that that's the way you had to do it. And we didn't have any driver's license. And the sheriff did not bother us because he knew we had a job to do. So that winter, I knew there had to be a better way of farming that land, especially by myself, if we couldn't get any help to help do it. So I modified the equipment that we had then, which was cultivators, pulled by 2 mules, and you had to walk. You had to walk behind the plow and work your plow by hand. So I came up with the invention that I could put lighter tension on each one of the plow, and I wouldn't have to walk. I could sit on the tongue of the cultivator and work these plows with my feet and work 2 mules to death. I would work them so hard in the morning that when I would come home to eat lunch, I would have to change the mules and take 2 new fresh ones. And my father was so proud of me at the improvements that I had made over the winter to work the farm in the spring. When I came home one night, he was so proud of what I was doing that he bought me the prettiest red horse with a white face and white feet with a long tail, and the prettiest leather saddle. Oh, it was in style. It had covered stirrups, padded leg pad, and my mother got mad at him and said, "Hey, we cannot afford that." And my father told her, "Hey, we can't afford not to let him have it. He's done a great job, and he deserves it." And I named my horse Slipper, and boy, could she fly, and I really enjoyed her. And during that time, I had to try and work what little schooling that I could get in, and my mother would help me at night by a kerosene lamp, and she would try to teach me, and at one time she did teach school. But that's the way things were. And at that time, you had to do what you had to do. Not long after that, my mother got cancer. And from then on, she started going down the hill, and the doctors operated on her, but they didn't get it all, so she never got well. And when I was 17 years old, she died. And that's when I lost my last best friend. And when I was 18 years old, my father died. So my sister there asked me to come and stay with her and her family until things kind of settled. Well, I got kind of restless being there, so I had another sister in Jacksonville. So I told her I thought I would leave there and come down to Jacksonville and see if I could get a job, because I knew it would be some time before we could sell and settle the estate. So I put my extra pair of pants and extra pair of shorts in a brown paper bag, and I told my sister I was going out to the highway, hitchhike to Jacksonville. And she said, "Son, you don't have any money." I said, "That's true, but I always knew there was something better for me just around the corner." And I felt then, at that time, I had to go looking for it. I felt like I needed to spread my wings. There was something there, I just had to find it. So she said, "Son, here's 15 cents in case you get hungry on the way to Jacksonville hitchhiking." So I took that 15 cents and went out on the highway, and I stuck my thumb up, and the first car that came by picked me up and carried me into Bainbridge, Georgia. And I was so lucky hitchhiking to Jacksonville that I just breezed right through. But I did get hungry on the way, And I took that 15 cents and bought me a nickel moon pie and a nickel Pepsi Cola, and that did the trick. So when I got to Jacksonville, I started looking for a job, and there just wasn't any jobs to be had because it was back during the Depression. But I knew there was a spot there for me somewhere, and I kept looking and looking and looking. And finally, after about a week, I heard of a service station that needed some help. And I went there and told him that I was ready to go to work. He said, "You had any experience?" And I said, "No, I have never worked at a service station, but I have got sense enough to do what you tell me to do." He said, "I believe it." He put me to work. So the first week that I worked there was 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. I made $3 a week. That was the first time that I had ever worked for anyone else other than my father. And to make $3 a week on my own was something. This station was kind of like 7-Eleven is today, our little town. Had grocers inside, gas pumps in the front. Of course, I had to pump the gas, check the tires, clean the windows, or whatever. And after a month, he raised me to $5 a week. And I found me a place a block away from there for room and board for $3 a week. I could pay my room and board and had $2 left over. And after 6 months, the owner made me the manager. I run the spot. Raised me to $10 a week. I was really in the loop. And before the year was out, he had raised me to $12 a week. And by that time, I was beginning to find and feel my way. So I was saving my money. And I had built up during the year at that time, a fairly good nest egg. In the meantime, my sister come by and went with me to buy a couple of new suits. So I went to Stein's suit store on Bay Street, and I bought one suit, a shark skin, for $1.50 for a suit. And then I bought a nice wool suit for $2.50 a suit, and a whole bunch of other clothes, and I was really feeling good. I need to shorten up this thing here some. So when my vacation came from being at the station and supermarket for a year, and I had a week off, so I knew there was better things down the road. So I went to J.C. Penney Company and applied there for a job that Monday morning, and the manager's name was Mr. Luke. And I filled out the application, and his secretary's name was Miss Miley. And I told them that I wanted a job there. I wanted to go to work for J.C. Penney Company. And he said, "We don't have anything now." He said, "Check with us in about 6 months. And we have got a new line coming out, and it's called the Big Mac." That was on Monday. So Tuesday morning, when he walked in the office, I was sitting there in Miss Miley's office, waiting on him to come in. And he said, "Didn't I talk to you yesterday?" I said, "Yes, sir. But I want to go to work with J.C. Penney Company. I feel like that this company needs me and that I can do a good job." So he told me to come back in about 4 months. So the next morning, which was Wednesday morning, what was I doing? Sitting in his office waiting until he come in. And he walked in again and he said, "Are you still here?" I said, "Yes, sir. I want to go to work for this company." Because the reason I wanted to go to work there was I knew that that job paid me a little over twice the amount of money that I was making. So I went back to his office the next morning, which was Thursday morning, and he walked in the office and he said, "I believe you do want to go to work for this company." I said, "Yes, sir." To me, that was determination. So he said, "Miss Holly, give this man a sales book and send him down in section 10. And I told Mr. Luke I'll work this store today, which was Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But I had to go back and work a week. I give my old boss a week's notice and work for him another week. Could I work it that way? He said yes. So that's when I came back and took off with J.C. Penney Company. When I was working at the service station, I was making $12 a week, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. When I went to work with J.C. Penney Company, I was making $25 a week, which was a little over twice as much money and less hours. And after I sold a certain amount of merchandise, several $1,000s worth a month, I made a small commission. I worked in the men's section, and at the end of the first day, I noticed everybody was totaling up their sales book to see what their total sales were for that day. Of course, I didn't know exactly how to handle that. So this guy, Carlisle, I never will forget their names because it was something new. Carlisle walked up to me and he said, "Hey, bub, have you totaled up how much you've sold today?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, everybody totals up at the end of the day and see what they've sold or done." I said, "Well, I'll add it up." So I got my total and he said, "How much does it come to?" And I told him, and he kind of laughed. And he said, "I think you made a mistake." I said, "No, I believe I can add." So he hollered over to Gustavson and said, "Hey, this guy here can't even add, let alone sell." I said, "Well, you add it up then." He said, "I don't believe you sold that much." I said, "Well, you add it up." So he did. He said, "Well, are you sure that you got each sales slip down here right?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." And come to find out, my first day on that floor, I had sold more merchandise than any other guy in the men's section. And I think from that, they thought, well, they got to be reckoned with this guy. But I couldn't wrap a package. So this good-looking girl named Viola Greek come over there and she said, "My name is Viola." She said, "I notice you cannot wrap a package." I said, "I've never wrapped a package in my life." And she said, "Well, I'm going to show you how." So she did. She was so nice to me. She had dark black hair and the prettiest blue eyes. So not long after that, I asked her for a date and made out. She accepted. I've told you the story at J.C. Penney Company that I found out after a few days that they had 10 highest salesmen in the United States that they posted on the wall in the store, and that I put in to get on that list. And it took me the second month to get on that list. And then I was wanting to be the number one in the United States. And the closest place I could come was the second. And some guy in New York City held on to that first place, and I could not, with everything that I tried, I could not knock him off. I've told you this story before, so I'll shorten up on everything. So I worked there about a year, and I had met these nice people at church, and he worked for this construction company, and I got to questioning him how much money they made, and he said, well, he made $40 a week, 8 hours a day, which was 40 hours, or $1 an hour. Well, that was more money than I was making. So I put in to try and get a job there because I was wanting to make more money. So he took me and introduced me to his boss. And he said, have you ever had any experience in construction work? I said, no. But I pulled the same thing on him that I pulled on Mr. Luke at J.C. Penney Company. I said, you just show me what you want done and how you want it done, and I'll do it. And I'll make you a good man. So he hired me. So boy, I thought, this is too good to be true. I'm just making more money than I ever made in my life. I even went down and bought me a car. It was only a year old, a nice Chevrolet business coupe. Paid $325 for it. Boy, I'm telling you, I couldn't stand it. I just felt like this was a little bit of heaven on earth. The man that owned the service station, and right from the beginning, he got me involved in going to church, back to church, which my mother always took me to church back home. And it was one of the largest churches in the city. And I got more and more involved and met a lot of nice young people. I went to church every Sunday and Wednesday, and then got so involved until I became involved in the visitation. And this took up almost all of my spare time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it seemed like I had no problem getting a date with the girls, because I stood about 2 or 3 notches above the rest of the young men, because I had a good job and about the only one at church that had his own car. And I was kind of the envy of the other young men around, because I could always seem to get a girl. I was in church one Sunday morning, and the church was full, the balcony was packed, and I was standing down at the end of the stairways, waiting on a friend of mine to come from the balcony down the stairs, and I saw the prettiest angel I ever laid my eyes on. She had on a dress with a long cape, and to me it was an angel floating down those stairs with that cape draping behind. I thought then, that's it, that's the one. I committed myself to her before I met her. And Aaron Taylor, a friend of mine, I said, Aaron, who is that angel? She said, that's Jean Rowe. You've never met her? I said, no, I sure would like to. So she introduced us. I asked her, could I take her home? And she said no, that she was there with her father. She didn't know it at that time, but I had made a commitment that one day she would be my wife. And as time went on, we did get to dating. I don't know if she ever felt as committed as I did or not, but there was no other girl or woman that was ever to turn my head again. I felt that strong about her. Dave, that was your Oma. But back then, I was so involved in my church, in BYPU, in training union, in teaching Sunday school, and I would lead the singing in our training union. And one day, the minister asked me would I be the congregational song director, and that scared me to death. It was such a large church, I didn't know if I could handle that or not, but I thoroughly enjoyed that. The congregation would sing so great from the bottom of their hearts that when you would be up there leading, singing, and the music and the voices coming out of the congregation, that it just thrilled your body so that it felt like electricity just going through, charging your body. It done your soul and heart so much good. You just felt a charge there from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. I forgot the punchline a while ago, a very important point that I referred to earlier in my tape, but I should have brought it out at the end when I courted your your Oma, and married her. There was a sale made. I kind of drifted off of motivation and climbing that mountain and searching for the better things in life. So I kept making changes for better, and sometimes working 2 jobs and long hours and saving my money. I thought I knew where I was going, but I hadn't quite found the spot. Met a friend of mine here in town that had the franchise for what they called then a spinning wheel. It was kind of like an ice cream parlor. They had 28 different flavors in milkshakes, and they were so good. People were almost knocking his front door down, coming through and buying those drinks. And to me, I thought he was making a lot of money. So I got a hold of the franchise company and got franchise in 3 counties in Orlando, Florida. So I had saved my money, and this was my first venture into my own business. So I found a good location and remodeled the inside of the building and was about ready to open up. The franchise was called the spinning wheel. I guess the reason they call it that is because you had to make the milkshakes on a mixer that spin around and around. But about a week before I opened, I knew I had to do some legwork and some PR work. So I had thousands of pamphlets printed, and I went to each school and distributed hundreds and hundreds of pamphlets, and went to the college there and distributed pamphlets all over the college and on the windshields of everybody's car, and telling them of the opening date. And on the pamphlets, I knew that I had to put something on it to stir their curiosity so they would come by at least one time. And by doing my legwork and PR work, from the first day that I opened this place up, it was crowded, especially in the late afternoon and at night. We couldn't keep up with the customers. They were waiting in line, and I was working my tail off day and night. I would get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and go to this dairy and make up my mix there to make my milkshakes out of. And it didn't take me long to find out that working day and night and the store full of customers, I was doing a lot of business, but I wasn't making any much money. And with that kind of volume and that kind of business, you would have thought I'd have been making a lot of money. It didn't take me long to realize that with this kind of hours, I should be making more money. A real estate man there got to noticing this business, that we were doing a lot of volume, and he thought we was making a lot of money. So he put in to want to buy. And he said that he had a customer that was real rich in Alabama, and that 2 of their kids or sons were fixing to graduate from the Winter Park College there in town, and that they would like to stay there and go into some kind of business, and that for me to put a price on it and sell it. And so I told him, no way. So after about 6 months, he would come by just about every night about closing time and just almost beg me to put a price on it. He took me bass fishing and just romanced me, trying to get me to sell this spot because he thought I was making a lot of money there. By then, I knew I wanted to sell it. I was just playing him by ear. The harder I played to get, the stronger he came on. So when he came by that night about closing time, and he latched on to me again about selling, and I said, well, this is the first time that I kind of broke into him and told him, well, that my wife had been getting a little homesick and wanted to go back to Jacksonville, and that I didn't really want to go, but I had put a price on it. And did I put a price on it? I didn't ever think that he would come and match that. I didn't have no idea anybody would be foolish enough to pay me that much money for it. So he left that night, and when I opened up the next morning, he was there in my place with a $1,000 check as a binder. He said the boy's parents from Alabama had more money than they had sense, and they just wanted something for their boys to play with, and I let them play. And Dave, never before have I ever seen that much cash money. I felt like I had cash money hanging out of all 4 of my pants pockets. And I felt like that I had earned this, and I wanted to pamper myself just a little. So I went down to the Cadillac place in Orlando and rolled me out a Cadillac and paid the man cash for it. So I came by and loaded up the car and picked up Gene and Laverne. Laverne was about 2 or 3 years old then. And I picked them up and we drove back into Jacksonville in style. So after a couple of 3 days here in Jacksonville, I began to kind of move around and see what was going on, to see whether this town was dead or alive. And I knew the people that knew how things were going on would be the Union Hall. So I went down and was talking to them, and they said, hey, this town is dead right now. And I said, well, where's the action? And everybody said Washington, D.C. They said things were really popping there. So I thought, well, that's the thing to do. So I came home that afternoon and told Jean to pack my clothes that I was going to Washington, D.C. in the morning. She thought I was crazy. So by then, I was not the type to sit around and wait for things to happen. I wanted to make them happen. So I went to Washington, D.C. the next day, and it took me 2 days and a night to get there. And everybody said that's where the real money was. I went to this big construction job that was on the way, and I went to the boss that day and asked him about going to work there, and he hired me on the spot and told me to report the next morning. And we talked about the salary, and good gracious in life, ooh, boy, when he told me how much an hour they paid, my mouth just dropped open. I didn't believe it. I knew I had hit the right spot. In the peak of this job, there was 369 men on it. It's hard to believe, but they got ready to finishing up the job. They kept laying off men and laying off men and laying off men, and I didn't get my pink slip to go. And finally, I was the last man left. And they kept me at least a month after this job was finished. And the only 2 men that was around at his office, the boss's office, was just he and I. And I couldn't figure that out. In the meantime, though, I had got a side job at night selling Munch TVs. And I was doing better at that than I was in the construction job. And my boss knew that I was doing that and that I was making more money at that than working with him. But they were just holding on me, and I wasn't working any and still paying me. And I was the last man there. So I went to my boss, Big Jim, and I said, Big Jim, I just cannot stay here and collect this money and not work for it. And he called me Jack. He said, Jack, I guess you wonder why you were the last man left. I said, I had given that some thought. He said, I knew you wasn't the most experienced construction man that I had ever hired. But he said, Jack, there's one thing about you. When I told you to do something and how to do it, you did it exactly that way. And he said, sometime those old timers will stand up and give me an argument. Well, the way I used to do it is this way. And he said they would stand there and argue with me at least 30 minutes sometime, trying to tell me how they used to do it. And he said, I didn't have that problem with you. You didn't question me. You just did what I told you to do. If I told you to do it wrong, I'd come back and you done it wrong. I said, Jack, you done it wrong. Scare you half to death. But I said, you did it exactly the way I told you to do it. I guess I can make the point here that the boss is always right. And if you're going to work for a company, be a company man. And between the construction job and my selling Munch TVs at nights, I would call in the afternoon, late in the afternoon on the phone and make appointments at these different houses and addresses. And I'd go there that night and demonstrate, and usually would close at least 2 a night. Between those 2 jobs, I was making very good money. And this is where I got the saying from, Munch TV, plan your work and then work your plan. So in checking around, I found that the going thing there right then was a food freezer plan. So I got me a job with this company that was doing that very thing. And I found out after 3 or 4 months selling there that there was a lot of money to be made in this if you would get in for it for yourself. So I opened up my own office and started my own food freezer plan. I had worked for this company long enough to know how it was done. So I put an ad in the paper, and I employed about 10 to 12 salesmen. So I put my salesmen through a training period, and I had a couple of girls that were using the phones during the day and calling and setting up appointments for that night for the salesman to go and close. And the salesmen were real happy over the commission that they were making. I had a connection there with a warehouse to pull the freezers from or buy the freezer from the wholesale warehouse. And I had a setup with a frozen food place that sold everything from steaks and beef and half sides of beef to whole hams and all kind of frozen vegetables, and I would tie the two together in a package. And the punchline here was, during your sale, is to have what you want, where you want it, and when you want it. And by them buying their food wholesale like that from the wholesale house, they save money on their frozen foods, meats, vegetables, or whatever. And that's where the savings came in. It was an advantage to the home buyer. And I found out later on that I could buy my freezers direct from the factory in carload lots and save a lot of money and not have to go through the warehouse, the wholesale house in D.C. And that's what I did. And that's when I started making real money. But it was something new there. And to lay the groundwork, I had to do a lot of advertising on radio, full-page ads in the newspaper. I had to educate the people because it was a new plan and a new program. And I got leads off of the radio and the newspaper for the salesman to go to the people's home at night and close the deals. This program started in California, and it had worked itself all the way across the United States to the eastern coast. And I had heard about some of the men in California that had made millions of dollars from this program. And I felt like I was well on my way to being a millionaire. But I was investing a lot of the profits back into advertisement, trying to educate the people on this new program, never thinking that this was a political town, and however way the politics went, that's the way the town went. So I woke up one morning that the Democrats had been in office for the past 20 years, and that was a Democratic town. So I woke up one morning and Eisenhower, the Republican, had won. And most of the people that we sold to was connected some way with the government. So I started getting the message back from the public that we were selling to. I'm not buying anything right now because I might lose my job with the government because I'm a Democrat and they will move a Republican in here to replace me, and I'll have to haul or carry this back to New Jersey or Wyoming or California or Georgia or someplace like that. So that town just died. So I could see my first million just slipping away. I did not give it a thought that changing the administration would make that much difference in the buying power of one town. But the brakes were put on overnight. And I kept hoping and thinking that things would make a turn for the better. And they didn't. And a lot of stores had to go out of business or either declare bankruptcy. So I could see the handwriting on the wall, so I folded tent and headed back to Jacksonville. So keep in mind that I went to D.C. to make that extra money. I felt like that I had accomplished my mission there. I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that as a young man, you're looking for that right spot with a good future. And if you don't find it, you just keep searching. I did not really enjoy the things that I were doing in the past, but I did it to make money. And I think the reason that I had done so well so far was the training on the farm that my mother and father instilled in me as a young man. And at no time did I ever lose faith and confidence in myself. I always felt that assurance that I had the ability to do what I wanted to do. I told you in the beginning of this tape that I had something special in mind that I wanted to say. And the first real time that you got my attention, and I never forgot it. Your father, David, told me about you wanting a new bicycle, so you went to this bicycle shop and got the price on a new bicycle. And in talking with the owner, you got the price on one and then told him how much discount you were going to get if you bought three. And I figured by that price that one bicycle was sold, that was to you. But you had to find two others that were willing to buy a bicycle. But I would have thought that was quite a task to take on then as a young man, to go out and find two other young men that were willing to buy a bicycle at that time. I know you had to do a selling job. It wasn't going to be easy, but you did what I thought was almost the impossible, would be to talk two other young men into coming in with you. But you did it and accomplished your mission, and I know it made you feel real proud. It proved to me then that you was cut from the right cloth and that you had the right stuff. That's when you got my attention. And I knew at that young age you had both feet on the ground. And as you grew older, I kind of kept my eye on you, kind of secretly, and your truck and other things that you have bought and sold for a good profit, and you've helped out others along that line. And what I have seen so far has made me real proud. It made me believe in you. And I know that there's great things ahead for you. I thought by the end of now I would have said all that I could say, but I just kind of got started and couldn't quit. But I have got to tell you how I got started in the automobile business and the things that I learned that I feel like helped me in my business. So finding out that you have just started your own new business, I feel like that if I tied your business and my business together, that some of the things that I found out along the way that I might mention may help you in your business. So I will send this tape on to you now and cut another tape at a later date. Dave, I don't know if you have got anything out of this so far, but as an old senior citizen, I have just kind of enjoyed sitting under this old oak tree in the shade and kind of reminiscing with my grandson. And I also would like to say hi to Maria, your beautiful wife, and that I love her. I love you both. This is the end of this tape because it's about to run out.
All of my heroes sit up straight. They stare at the ground, they radiate. Me, I'm mumbling in the kitchen for the sun to pay off. Lonely as a ring on a cold coffee cup. I'm some sick hound digging for bones. If it weren't for second chances, we'd all be